I got to tell, I got to say, I get it. Does everybody get it? Get it on?
Got it.
Okay, you got it already. So, Kimberly, we're delighted to have you join us and spend some time with our little band of broadband advocates. I know you're not, this is just the conversation, so I know we're not asking for a full presentation and stuff like that. But I thought I'd ask you a question to kick off the conversation. So yesterday, Mark and I were at this meeting at Western Carolina University, and it was all about broadband. And it was interesting, but the underlying tone that struck me was that we're all losing energy in this field, that people are tired out, things are kind of, in a administrative state instead of an exciting policy state right now. It's falling into bureaucracy as opposed to citizen activism and whatever. A thought occurred to me that when I was in Utah, one of our board members had written a book about the need to bring energy into change processes. So with your expertise and knowledge, I'd be interested in, do you feel the same about this whole arena of technology and broadband and stuff? And am I totally off base with getting that feeling about this? And then how does that apply to the work that you're doing?
Thank you for asking. It's hard to agree with you because I try to remain optimistic, but I can see where you're picking up on that. I think, especially in the United States, we are used to our government working in a painfully slow manner when it comes to any type of, policies, any type of funding streams or opportunities. And this is beyond warp speed. Thinking back, and some of us can probably remember other projects, but even back to the BTOP era, the last big injection for broadband technologies that was, as a result of the recession, there was an Obama era stimulus grant, around 2008. It was a minuscule grant in comparison to what we're seeing now. And I think that what's happened is because it's so fast and the pressure's on so hard, and the places that are kind of charged with operating it didn't have any systems in place, not to accommodate the money, not to disperse it, not to plan for it, not to understand even what's going on. That there was a lot of, obviously a lot of confusion. There's hundreds of pages of policy, and each state is different. So it's even hard to look over the, border at another state and see what they're doing, because that may not be working. A lot of personalities are involved. Some states are taking this. I appreciated your comment about kind of how a lot of things on the equity side seem much more community oriented and driven, and they are designed to be that. So in best practices, it is. In some places, it's disappointing to see where it's just lip service or checking boxes. So I am sure that that's similar when it comes to the, kind of to the more infrastructure projects that people are really the power is concentrating where power is usually concentrated. And I think there's been a lot of brain drain when it comes to people who have been elevated into other positions or kind of shuffled around in this, and people who are charged with big projects, even like managing a digital equity office, or a librarian that has never done any of this before and now is responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in these community listening sessions and understanding the depths of these covered populations that they've probably never worked with, at least not deliberately, as opposed to just as a member of the general public. So I think that the speed in which we've had to kind of move and mobilize and get ready for this has really kind of done some harm in terms of the creativity and in terms of the actual accuracy. And we are seeing places where big, shifting a little to what I'm doing, and I'll explain more, but seeing pockets of very determined communities that are going against the kind of norm and kind of, jumping over a lot of the hurdles or roadblocks that we can find inspiration. But I think we see a lot of states that are taking the reins and doing what they want, and a lot are beholden to the big powers that be, the major telecoms and, and kind of the concentrations of power that they're used to and that feel comfortable with.
So give us some advice.
Oh, some advice.
Yeah,
Go
so
Vogue. No. So it's been fun working with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They've been around. This will be their 75th anniversary as a nonprofit that's fighting against monopolies, essentially. It's about bringing local control. It's about building local economies. It's about having autonomy over real needs that you see in a community. And it's interesting because you could say it's very lefty, because at first it seems like, very radical, kind of let's set up our own communes and do our own thing. But it's just as appealing to the right, that it's like, we don't want, somebody in Washington telling us how to run our community or what we need in terms of healthcare. So you can see it in a nonpartisan way too, which is very exciting in this project, because the pockets of the country that are really missing broadband and that are really left out of the opportunities, and that we see major health disparities and everything else, workforce deficits and all of that. They span the gamut of red states, blue states, more rural, but there are actually more people in urban areas that aren't connected at all and don't have access at all than there are in all of rural America. So you can't even call it, one population's issue or one population's problem. What I'm seeing and why I'm excited to work with ILSR is that they really are, not only do they know about, but they're helping facilitate these really community-driven projects. So I know one example is in Far, Texas, where they've taken, pretty much pooled as a community, their ACP money to build new infrastructure that the city will own, that any revenue that's generated goes back into the city, and they can contain this as a sustainable system for as long as they can. And so the ACP or the internet may not ever be free, but a community or a government has a different bottom line than a corporation, frankly. I mean, we do live in a capitalist society, and I complain about Comcast or AT&T, but they have responsibility to their corporate charters, and they are supposed to maximize profit, and they have responsibility to shareholders. But a city or a county doesn't have that same bottom line. And I think that that's something that, as the ILSR has been opening people's eyes and working with communities that are demonstrating that, or finding other funding sources to, even if, like in New York City, for example, we shredded our master plan, but I can't say we, that was the mayor's decision, and the master plans are supposed to inform all of the digital equity and all of that. And some really brave folks here said, you know what, that's not okay. We spent 5 years working on this. It was an absolute community-driven project with every nonprofit and representative of every population and neighborhood we have. We're going to take our HUD money and we're going to build our own, open access network as planned. And they found a way to jump over it, and they're starting to do it. So there are ways, if you know the ins and outs of your kind of local government, you can find ways to, get over procurement roadblocks, or to find pockets of money that don't make you reliant on the whims of what's happening with BEAD. I think you saw, and I still don't quite understand, they opened it up for challenges, and there's a whopping 10 days to challenge any of the BEAD allocations due to the maps that were already inaccurate. So, some of it's this lip service, but taking inspiration from communities that are saying, like, or maybe we are covered, but that's because somebody's saying we're covered. Can we do something to see if we really are, and who isn't in our community? I think that's happening with folks in North Carolina, like Center for Digital Equity. A lot of the advocacy groups are saying, like, okay, they can say we're covered, but we know that's not necessarily true. We just don't know how to go about figuring out what's not true about it. And that kind of, just where there's a will, there's a way, is turning into some really exciting projects and keeping me inspired that local communities do know what's best. But they also know, like, where there's a plan to build, a tower, but it's in the middle of the swamp, and that's never going to work, and it won't reach the school. That was something that was happening when we're working in the colonias and, rural New Mexico, and on the border of kind of El Paso, where it's all a little bit no man's land around there. But they know their communities, they know the anchor institutions, they know the terrain, and they now are learning when to call BS on the powers that be that are saying what we're doing is adequate for your needs. And they can, with confidence, now say, no, we're not. So that's what kind of some of these Let's Get Started or boot camps are. And it's to demystify, like, what's fiber to the home, what's broadband, why can't Starlink solve our problems? All of these things that you just kind of hear out there, like how we as Americans like buy Tide because Tide is a brand that we trust. We're starting to do that with internet too, because it's so much more in the vernacular, but people don't really know what that means or the implications. So demystifying it and empowering people with information, and then giving them creative ways to kind of get around red tape has been a very inspiring process in all of this.
Kimberly, you mentioned a town in Texas that pooled ACP funds.
Yeah.
Help me understand that, because my understanding was the ACP is more the individual grants. Is there an option that we're missing somewhere?
I wanted to give you the case study because I should have even had one of my colleagues, except for it's very early where they live. It's been on the East Coast, but the ones who can talk the most about it, or at least in Central Texas, I'm going to follow up and send you a case study about what's happening there. They're far ahead, high, pun intended, early morning, pun intended, but about really setting up a system that had infrastructure. And what they're doing now too, and some of this is a private-public partnership. Ford Foundation invested in a big planning grant. There's been another foundation that's helping with, like, I think $10 million for workforce development, because also what's happening is in some of these communities that are so marginalized and poor and also remote, they haven't had the tools to build these networks. They haven't had the workforce to build them, let alone maintain them. So some of these broadband boot camps that they're calling, I said it's not trauma informed to call it a boot camp. And one of the lawyers, I just kind of let that out because I work a lot in trauma. And she said, oh yeah, if you called it LSAT, I would have run away. So, but we're just saying the idea of like an intensive where you kind of understand the technology and learn, because it's a skill, but it's still a kind of dangerous skill. And we need workforce, and a lot of community colleges are stepping in to offer free programs for people to be technicians, which is encouraging because we need that workforce. But also if people in a community or in a tribe, which is where this is happening first and most, are learning how to manage how a network works, how to build it, how to manage it, how to troubleshoot it. They have so much autonomy and a workforce component for it. Then they're training college kids to answer a help desk. Then they have, local people that represent their own ISP going out to talk to people about it, as opposed to calling, offshore in, the Philippines with Comcast or something. And if Comcast was there, they would have been there, but they haven't been. And so there's a lot of need for these local solutions. I got a little derailed because the exact functions as far as something that I would love, like Christopher Mitchell and one of the team, to talk about, because they've been watching it for a long time. Brownsville is kind of connected. These are a lot of the border areas in South Texas, but they're comprehensive workforce development of all types around tech and the soft skills of tech, digital literacy, or call centers, help desks, things like that. A lot of certification programs, because people will have access to internet and job opportunities that were not there before, especially in some of these towns without industry. And then also the ability to run and manage their own networks. And even if they break even, or if they eventually profit from them, like, Comcast is profitable and these big ISPs are profitable, so could a community, site be. And that's something that's really new. A quick example I can talk a little more about in Colorado that's surprising, where you kind of see the states or the community's interests jumping over some of the power of the ISPs, is Colorado's kind of first cable line ran from, Wyoming into Denver not that long ago, like in my grandpa's lived lifetime. It's really a hotbed of some of the major ISPs that started building out cable, and they built it to people who could pay for it. Like, that's the business. But those cable lines also became internet lines, and they also kind of set the stage for how things, are set up. Colorado had some really strong rules in place about any government entities not being allowed to run an ISP of any sort. And it used to be all communication. So there could be no government channel, and it was part of the deregulation, I think, of the cable industry. But that's really hindered any kind of community progress, especially in areas where the major ISPs don't want to build because it's too expensive, like in the Rocky Mountains. So counties could decide to build their own municipal broadband infrastructure, but it required a referendum and a vote. So it was just a clunky process and a lot wouldn't do it. And there was a bill that just passed through actually allowing governments and communities to build their own networks, which is groundbreaking in Colorado, which opens up whole other avenues, A, for building it, and B, for revenue, because we also have crazy tax policies called Tabor law, where you can't have any surplus revenue in the state budget. It all has to go back directly to the taxpayers in the form of a check. It can't go into any other services, and you can't invest in social service, and it's capped at the budget from the year before. I mean, there's all of these cockamamie rules that mean that even if the state built it, it wouldn't have necessarily gone to anything good. The revenues wouldn't have gone to anything good. And this puts it back in the local community's hands. So if Loveland, Colorado wants to run an ISP, profit from it, and invest it in senior services, that opens the road, I think, for them to be able to do that, which is very exciting.
Yeah, that is really groundbreaking and something that North Carolina needs. I did hear from Karen. She sent a text message and she got hung up at some other meeting, but is anxious to watch the video. So Mark, we got to make sure that we send the video. And then Karen also wanted to know whether you might be available for an email message from her.
Oh, absolutely. And also to fact check myself, because this is early in the morning and, I'm working with some real experts that know, so I know what I know. And
you're not talking to real experts. And so
real people.
We won't check any of your facts.
So a couple, but I do want to far some of the examples of places that have done really cool work and how they're really managing this just north of me.
Let's zero in. Karen, as you know, is a patient advocate and does a ton of work with helping people with technology, the interface between technology and the healthcare system.
Yeah, okay.
And she has put on programs with me and with others and with Mark at our Senior Citizen Center. But she is probably our local expert on this connection between seniors and the technology. And I would enjoy hearing your update, if you will, on what the kind of current initiatives are that are going on around the country that are particularly exciting in that area.
Sure.
And then also just a little bit about your work with the foundations, and then organizations can work with foundations effectively.
Absolutely. So those are three big topics, and I'm happy to talk about them. I'm wondering if, because of the health, my last presentation to the group of grant makers, where I got to meet a lovely lady named Carrie, was about health equity and the whole digital equity and health equity kind of moment that we're experiencing. I don't know if it would be interesting to talk through that a little bit, where I can just kind of walk through some of the major points of the connection.
If we lose interest, we all have the ability just to leave the conversation. So
that's true.
Free, but I think, well, Karen would be more into the weeds on this than we are. So maybe just the high points.
Yeah, well, it might be something that she wants to talk about separately too. But what's really happening? So the ideas of digital equity and health equity are very in sync in terms of just the concept. We're not talking about equality anymore. The language has evolved to be more inclusive and more representative of meeting people where they are with resources they need so they can participate in the ways we all participate. And I think that that's something that we've seen that, we know now in healthcare that, your zip code is more important when it comes to determining your health outcomes or predicting them than your genetic code. We have such disparities in all of these areas. There was an extremely groundbreaking, very, very, very comprehensive report that was just completed about who died of COVID, right? Really, I mean, we know generally, but this is we're just getting to the moment. COVID's not over, but we're getting to the moment where research has gone through processes and we're starting to get a lot of new information that's all very consistent. One of these, and I can share with her if you're interested, but we know for a fact that people of color that are Black or African American or Latino, non-white, died at higher rates across all types of communities, urban, rural, suburban, and that people without internet had higher mortality rates, period, across all those communities. So you start to see, and that still gives me the chills because the evidence has just mounted and you can't deny it. This isn't a rogue study. This was also with 3,400 counties and a whole cross-sectional one that mirrors other studies that have been done by Yale, or Johns Hopkins did a scan of all public housing of all sorts, senior, so mostly seniors, up to the 85% of them are seniors only across the United States, and saw those disparities in access and also in, in health, and then mental health and all of this. But we're starting to draw all these conclusions without doubt. I mean, those of us who are activists knew this, or I worked with seniors for a long time, 5 boroughs of New York City in all kinds of languages, we've seen it. But to have this irrefutable proof and an understanding that digital equity is healthcare. And that's something that even the New England Journal of Medicine has published clearly. So that was a line in the sand that was just a few months ago that said, this is indisputable. Digital equity is healthcare. Digital inclusion is healthcare. We have to start thinking about that because the cost of not being online is so great in terms of health disparities, like with COVID. With workforce opportunities, there was it was the Center for Digital Futures or something, and I don't want to misquote them, but they also did a study, like a big data study of 43 million job postings across all types of online sources and offline sources, and they came up with 92% of them require digital skills. 92% of them. So when you're thinking about workforce and who's left out and who has opportunity, at the same time, we've learned that people who are in low wage jobs not only have higher rates of hypertension or depression or diabetes, we've now linked that directly to cognitive decline. So earlier instances of cognitive decline, higher instances of Alzheimer's disease in people with persistent low wage jobs. So you're starting to see these parallels that are right there in your face if you draw those connections to them, that's building the case and kind of driving the advocacy side, because we have to get people online. The report that ILSR did is just adding to the ROI. We've seen, devastation in the South where states are rejecting Medicaid dollars, where hospitals are closing, people are getting sicker, and people are not online. This is a disaster waiting to happen, and it's a homemade one. Those are very frustrating because you can't argue that money is the problem. And this report that ILSR just put out was just a study of a number of rural counties in the South. And if there was internet and the healthcare costs alone, just from reduced hospital admission, so reduced readmissions, reduced hospital, emergency room admissions, and just the windshield time of driving and lost labor due to caregivers or missed days of work, would more than pay for the infrastructure on its own. So even encouraging health systems to get involved where they can and where they are has an ROI that also you can't argue that it's an economic issue. These become social justice issues. And that's what we're seeing more and more clearly, I think, every day.
Is any of the data, available for our particular part of the world here in Western North Carolina? Were we part of the South in the study?
In that one, no, I think it was across Georgia and Alabama. I can hear it just hot off the presses day before yesterday. It's exciting though, because it was, I think they did it because there wasn't a study like that on the ROI for it. But I think you can definitely draw some of the analogies with with the makeup and the demographics. But there's also a healthcare cost calculator that's a very, here, let me see if I could pull it up and show you, because you can basically enter your county or hospital and it will return the savings. It's basically the calculator that drove the data for this. And it's in that report. Let me see if I can find it. Here, I'll just send the main page to you. So you could theoretically, and I have to try it now because it just came out, but you can put in your county or your hospital, and it'll return the economic savings for having people online in these 5 ways. This is, that's the ACP dashboard.
Do you work with anybody at Dogwood Trust and our large foundation locally?
Not yet, but I would love to.
Okay. Mark, do you know, is Dogwood doing anything on?
I am not aware of it.
It's really there's really a disconnect, and it's our fault, I think, more than anything, is that Dogwood is, very concerned about health determinants, determinants of health, and this fits right into that. But they're really shy and hesitant to really do anything major. And so, part of the thing would be to encourage them to really jump into this field significantly. I got to say, for Braden's side, he's
Absolutely.
tired.
I mean, we're looking with it because, we know that loneliness and isolation alone predicts morbidity in older adults more than smoking, more than all of these other things. That research has been ongoing and consistent for years now. That's one of the clearest kind of social determinants that most people know about aging at this point. But then you start to look at workforce and cognitive decline. You start to look at disparities when it comes to all of the other social determinants that are either caused or exacerbated by the digital divide, or could be mitigated by closing the digital divide. And you can check boxes in terms of all of those to make the case that these programs to include people and train them and help them, and also have at home, monitoring devices that aren't, Big Brother, but that are incorporated into people's lives, and how much it saves them money, how many hospital visits it reduces. There are wonderful programs that they might be interested in scaling because they're working. They're, incubated by academics, and they're tested in the field, and they're designed in communities. And to kind of translate them into similar communities is starting to feel like a no-brainer. I hope it is.
Well, I'm probably not fair to Dogwood. They do spend a lot of money, and they do a lot of good things, but they're awfully quiet about what they do. And it's really a major frustration, because some of us are used to people shouting, "Hey, we're doing this great thing here, and join us and do this." And they've done some good work, but it's weird that we don't know about it from the telecom side.
No, but if they want to talk about it or learn about it, because I'm seeing that with a lot of funders, because technology is overwhelming. People don't know how it works. It's scary. It seems risky. It's not for me, or it's too expensive. And all of the kind of stigma about technology itself just breeds a stigma about people's ability to learn it, about their competency, about the usefulness of it for different populations, about the high investment that needs to be made versus, or how high touch it is. There's a lot of anxiety I've noticed working with funders when it comes to funding technology. But there also are a lot of models that are so promising and so clear. And there's a lot of, ways to make the case. When I was telling them, some are getting pushback because they're like, "Oh, well, don't fund this. It's too high tech, like keep just feeding people." And it's like, that like ageism in medicine costs $63 billion a year alone, just ageism. That's without technology. Then you add technology on top of it. There are really creative ways to make the case if they're interested in that, or looking at models that really need to be supported, especially with the threat of a lot of telehealth services going away. Older adults love and are adopting it, and hospitals are not supporting it.
And Kim, with your comments too, in the last month or so, the 2 months, there's been an absolute flurry of a internet revolution called ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, and that future state of how will that benefit healthcare or other applications. What comments or thoughts do you have on AI and the use of broadband and digital literacy?
Interesting. So I actually have a call with a colleague this afternoon about it. There's two ways to look at it. One is that AI and all of these kinds of technologies they're not new. They're emerging. They've been worked on. They are at play every time you try to return some underwear that came in the wrong size, be online or whatever. These systems have been being developed. What's very new is the general public's ability to play with them, and the way that we're learning kind of collectively as a culture, how they work or don't work. What scares me about them, I have to admit, is, well, all technology is human, all of it. So technology itself and the algorithms carry the same biases as the people who design it. So the idea that we're opening up the access to technology and learning opportunities to communities that haven't traditionally had that access is huge when it comes to just the development of technology. One concrete example that most people can understand now, if you've ever used like Google Translate or a translate program, as late as I showed some of the funders in 2019, how they translated a couscous, like directions how to make couscous I had brought back from Israel, which was a very simple, it's water and salt and couscous. There was a blood of a virgin, Japan, a bar, a devil. I mean, I can't even tell you what was in there, but that's because there wasn't enough data to do it. And I'll send you these pictures if you want to use them for any of your presentations, because that was just a couple of years ago. And now there's almost seamless live translation programs, especially specialized ones in Zoom. If you speak another language, they're not perfect, but they're getting so much better. And the more people use them, the better they get. So I love that people are trying to trick these programs. It scares me that they are smart enough, they're well-trained enough to say, like, tell me 6 articles about this, and they will actually ascribe them to authors that didn't write them. And that's something that's coming up in journalism. So the media literacy game just changed, I think, more than almost anything else yet, is really understanding the value, but also being highly suspicious of the sources. It's like, tell me, somebody that wrote like this, it'll tell you someone who wrote something like that, but it wasn't that person. And that's really dangerous in the age of misinformation.
Yeah, Kimberly, time has marched on here, and I really find you fascinating, and I could listen to you for a long time, but we do need to be conscious of the hour, and we are taping this, and so we'll share it with Claire and with Karen and Yvette and others. But I presume I know the answer to this, or I think I do. That is, I'm inclined, I think I want to set up a meeting, a Zoom meeting with you and the Dogwood Trust people. And we'll drag Carrie into this from the Michigan connection. She knows a lot of the people at Dogwood and works with them. And I think it would just be fun to do that. And we could also hear them from, I'm sure Dogwood's doing more than I'm aware of in this area. But if you're willing to do that, I think that would be a great next step.
I would love to.
And so we'll be in touch with that. Do you think that would be fun, Mark, to do that? Mark's pretty excited about that. You can just
absolutely.
I would love it. And if I can get them jazzed up on this digital equity and tech equity connection, and arm them with some information and some, if statistics shock me, they're shocking because I'm out there all the time.
So Kimberly, you might enjoy this analogy, and that is, when I was in the state Senate, I got involved in the rights of non-smokers, and it really came about partly because when Carrie was born and Joyce was in the hospital, the person next door in the room was smoking away and et cetera, and smoking was totally allowed in hospitals.
Oh yeah.
So I put in a bill to ban smoking in hospitals, and it was just amazing the flack I took from hospitals. How dare legislators get involved in this this issue? And I led the efforts in Michigan for the rights of non-smokers in the legislature. And then we created from that a Michigan Health Initiative, which was to really, it was funded by cigarette tax revenue, with the idea is to promote behavioral changes and to reduce the cost of healthcare by prevention instead of remediation after the fact. I sort of suspect that the conversation about telemedicine and broadband access is somewhat in the early stages, just like the cigarette thing is. That 20 years from now, people are going to look back and they'll say, well, of course we know that that's tied into people's health, but we're just at the beginning stages of that, I think.
That is a wonderful analogy. I'm going to use it. It makes it is exactly, yeah.
It's
sad to see how long it takes for us to recognize what works. in these upstream or preventative ways and how much health happens in community, and it shouldn't happen in the hospital.
Well, if you want to feel a little bit better about this, I used to be in the polling business too, and Daniel Yankelovich was a pollster, and he wrote a great article about the 7 stages of how the public comes to judgment on policy issues.
Okay.
It's dated now, but it's really was fascinating to me at that. And a perfect example of my life was smoking, but also on how the public dealt with the AIDS crisis. And his model, and the point of why a pollster was doing this thing is that if you ask questions in a public opinion survey that the public has reached a judgment on, the exact wording doesn't matter. Okay, so if you ask the public, are you pro-choice or are you pro-life? People have an opinion about that. They've reached a judgment in their own mind where they stand. And it's not going to be affected very much by the adjectives in front of the question or the situation. And his point with so much polling is incorrect because people haven't reached a judgment on the issues. And so they're just going by the latest news. They're going by what they heard last week. They're going by what their wife might have told them that morning. It's all very work. And so he went through this process the public goes through in reaching judgment. And at the beginning of the thing is an awareness model. Okay, just getting aware and knowledgeable. And then you add knowledge. But the third section is you try different solutions to it, and approaches. So in AIDS, the first response was to isolate everybody and set up, let's get all these people with AIDS and put them on an island somewhere. And we did this a little bit with COVID. Let's isolate everybody and whatever. And finally with AIDS, it turned out to be education was the only solution that really made sense and go with the science of it. But anyway, I think on this whole area of telehealth and broadband, we're in the same sort of coming to judgment about these things. So I digress, but we'll sign you up.
No, but now I'm going to look at the book. Yeah,
I don't even remember the title of it, but it was, I used it all the time in the polling business because, how you wrote a question was really could determine the outcome of the responses, and yet if the public had reached judgment about an issue, there was very little chance to move the needle on that issue. I think the public's attitude towards Donald Trump, for example, the public has reached a judgment about that, and how you ask it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. My grandpa was a politician in Missouri, used to say that he thinks the biggest problem in America that's happened in his lifetime, he passed away about 15 years ago, but he said that changing your mind became like a deficit in your character versus a sign of growth and intellect.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
And that's something that's really hard to see, and that polling shows exactly people make up their mind before they have information and they just dig in their heels, and it's a shame and it's hard to counter.
All right, so we have a task, and I'll go about, and we'll get you some airtime. The other thing, Braden, let's get back to, and so Karen, well, if you're watching this on a recording, Karen, reach out and talk to Kimberly, and I need you to be part of this conversation with Dogwood as well. So let's do that. On the document, Braden, you're going to work on a new draft with new graphics and polish it up a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Which now that my only final pretty much is finished up, I'm done with my classes, so I should definitely have time, especially over the course of the next week, to take care of it.
I don't know. I feel guilty asking Ashley to be the editor on this thing. I think we need to have a editor type look at it. Right. I am not. I unfortunately in graduate school took a class in speed reading, and it has destroyed my ability to really edit documents. I get the idea,
right, yeah.
But somebody that's into the details look at it and say, oh, you need a period here, a comma there, different things. So I think it's pretty well written, but I think it would be worthwhile for us before we really go public with it to do that. The other aspect, Mark, I need you on that document. Mark? waiting for him.
Yes.
Chat. Okay.
Mhm.
Braden, I chatted you the job board for NDIA because we need smart people like you. Keep your eye on that one.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
there's
I
a
don't know if
world
you've
of
seen it,
job
but if you
opportunities.
care about this
Oh,
issue
yeah.
at all, they
Absolutely,
need
yeah.
smart people, not just that organization, but across the country in all roles related to digital everything. So that's a pretty
Right.
good one.
You said you wanted
Thank you so
smart
much.
people? You
Sorry.
said you wanted smart people?
Yes, I did.
Oh, well.
Well, I want smart people. I don't know what they're
Right,
looking
yeah.
for.
Well, we
Sometimes
think
they're looking for bean counters and pencil pushers, but
Oh, yeah,
We
right.
think Braden.
I would like more smart people.
The issue related to this document, Mark, that I would like you to spend a little time on. We did a survey. We've got 20 people, I think, out of our 100 and some to respond to the survey that we sent out about what they saw as the big issues. And Kimberly, you might enjoy looking at those results too. It's
Absolutely.
it's not a scientific survey, but we asked 100 people that had been part of our summits and stuff that were involved in broadband, what they saw as the big issues and et cetera. I think we
Wow.
need to take those
I would love to
results
see it.
and prioritize those 10 issues that we have from the most to the least significant based upon the survey results. Mark,
Absolutely.
can you look at that data and see if we can do that in a quasi-legitimate way? I mean, it isn't precise.
100 people is a bigger data sample than I've seen a lot of the state offices doing with this. So I would love to see that.
Well, we only have 20 that responded. Okay. So,
Whatever. It's probably more than, I mean, I'm not kidding.
well,
It's,
it's really sad that more people aren't really engaged in all this stuff. But at any rate, if you could help me out with that, Mark, that would be great. And then communicate with Braden. So if you could continue to work on a draft, then once we get a draft that we're comfortable with sharing, my intent is to share it first to the smaller group, people that have participated on these Friday meetings and with our advisory committee and et cetera. And then we'll set up some meetings with legislators and stuff to talk about it. And we'll also have our postcards and stuff like that. So that's about it for this morning from my point of view. What else, Mark, do we have?
I am going to stop the recording. I want to thank him so much for being part of our
Yes.
morning recording. You have brought some visions and dialogue that ILSR just continues to be stellar in our nation, and I appreciate your engagement with that.
Right. Thank you so much again. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
And we didn't talk very much about it, but Mark is organizing on May 19th the session on artificial intelligence as it's related to the workforce.
Oh, wow.
And Band North Carolina just recently had a webinar on digital skills. I think we're going to see the issue of digital skills become more and more discussed and prominent.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd love to be part of it. I mean, there's also so much promise for workforce when it comes to even augmented reality and the way that you can not have to memorize things rote in a way that you used to have to work in a warehouse. And some of it's for lower skilled jobs, but it takes away that learning curve if you can have something that shows you what to pick off the shelf or what to plug where. And those things are really exciting and promising to help to upskill people in the workforce. So I would love to hear more. This is just the side stuff that I need to learn more about.
Well, we try and keep you happy. That's our goal.
Thank you.
Wake up every morning. How can we make Kimberly happy?
I love that. Well, it started my Friday off. I was missing my North Carolina New Mexican activists that I used to hang out with on Friday mornings.
right?
And
Oh,
they just
man.
finished a cohort. And,
Wow.
we have a green chili cook-off coming later this summer, but I was missing them. It really ended my week on a high note. So this is a wonderful consolation.
Well, we're a little bit frustrated, as you can tell, I think, because there seems to be a little ebbing of initiative, and not just from us, but on the digital equity side, it's kind of unclear what's happening there as well.
Yeah.
So,
That's something, yeah, I want to continue talking to you about it, especially on kind of on the other side of North Carolina and some little things we've seen happening, and a little more faith in some of the small ISPs that are coming into communities to kind of solve the breakdown of why the big ones aren't working in those communities. And certainly their businesses with a business interest, but I think they have a whole different orientation. So it's not like a government bottom line, but they have a different orientation toward the people and the needs
so
there.
an interesting case study from North Carolina will be when you have a conversation with Karen. And Karen, and it's not just her professional job, it's where she lives. And actually, Mark rents an apartment from her in the neighborhood. They have 100 homes, I think it is, something like that, and have extremely poor service from AT&T. And yet 70% of these people work from home. I mean, it's a real.
Well, it could be why there's poor service too, because we don't have the
Right.
bandwidth to
they're
support
sharing,
it.
they're sharing different things. But the county's money is tied up. The county can't do anything because of the state prohibitions. The ISP is in this AT&T, and that came up yesterday. The Western Carolina thing was somebody from her neighborhood was there. Wasn't that right, Mark? Wasn't that guy from her neighborhood who runs an IT business, a photography business in Asheville?
In Fairview.
Yeah, he has
Wow.
to drive to town to download and upload his photos and whatever. But it's just a classic example of here, these are not low income people, these are high income people. But because of the state regulations and the way the system operates, they can't get decent service. So,
Wow.
so Karen,
And have you reported that, like with any of the FCC things, or?
oh yeah,
I'm just curious because
Karen can walk you through.
scary
She's
too.
been getting everybody to go on and do their surveys, and
Because you also have to be brave. There's a lot of legalese, and it would scare me away if I was less than confident that that wouldn't have repercussions. I think that's hindered a lot lot from reporting it. So
you talk to Karen and just push that.
Okay, we gotta talk to
and you
Karen.
will get
Karen,
all
call
the
me. No, we're not recording,
Karen.
but have Karen call me.
You may not want to push that button, but it's kind of an example of what we're talking about. Okay, so we got our work assignments. I'll go to work and figure out what to do with Kimberly and the Dogwood Trust. I think that would be good. And Kimberly, do you accept honoraria for doing that sort of presentation?
Oh, it depends how much work it is to do it,
Okay.
but
Because Dogwood
maybe.
has funded our speakers by providing like $1,500, I think it was, in honoraria for making a presentation at our summits and stuff. And Dogwood has been very supportive of doing that.
That's nice. I would love that. Yeah.
Okay. But
that would be a really
put that
good
as a
one.
requirement, if that's okay with you. We won't put it as a requirement, but
No,
I
but
need to know that because that'll be a question they ask. They'll say, well, these
I
consultants.
might even come in person for that. I need to get to know.
Need to get to Asheville. Yeah, Asheville's not a bad place.
I gotta get there. So,
But we'd like
I
to
might
see you.
just use
And
it
Carrie
as a
would like to
travel
see you. Why don't you
fund.
come down and visit Carrie?
but I'd love to. Yeah, it's somehow long overdue. There's so much good happening that I keep hearing about, and different pockets in different parts of my world. I'm like, I gotta finally visit this mythical place. So, should they decide to do that, it might just go straight to a plane ticket.
Well, Carrie gave me an update on your work with the Council of Funders, and so.
Oh yeah, oh good. And I'll send her, actually, she should have access to the presentation I did for them too, and I can share that with you.
Silence on that conversation, so. But anyway, thank you, Kimberly.
Okay.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Have a wonderful
All right.
day.
Aidan, thanks for your good work. I'm delighted you're willing to continue with us at least.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Great, and you, Mark, and Claire should really schedule another Zoom to go through the document one last time as we get that. And then we also can talk about distributing these cards, and I know that Claire wants to do that, so.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank
See ya.
you.
Take
Have a
care.
wonderful weekend.
You too.